I recently built two brand new Game Boy Colors. One of them has an IPS panel, and I've been using this one for a little bit, but I recently built one of the OLEDs, and I gotta say, this thing is really special. When I built this one, I cleaned the power switch, and I've noticed a few things. When you turn this on, this power light doesn't flicker. I've had no issues with screen flicker or anything else on this. You might be seeing some strobing, but that's just the OLED panel. I'm not seeing that in real life, it's just the way the camera's picking it up. However, on the IPS one, I've been noticing there's a little bit of flickering going on with the power light, and the backlight on this Game Boy has been flickering. There's a specific reason for that, and I believe this power switch is really dirty. Since I cleaned it on the OLED one, I figured I'd show everybody how to clean it on their IPS Game Boy. Let's open this one up, and I'll show you how to clean out your power switch. First thing you need to do is to disassemble your Game Boy. So go ahead and remove your batteries and fully disassemble your Game Boy. Go ahead and remove the cover for the power switch. And we need to open up this. Let me pull this open so I can show you a little bit more of what's going on. Go ahead and set your soldering iron to 300 degrees. We're going to have to desolder the wire that's attached to the power switch. This should be pretty easy since we've already attached it. Simply put your soldering iron on the one that we've attached the wire to and pull on the wire and it should come off. You don't need flux for this or anything as it's pretty easy to take out. I recommend using tweezers for this to pull away the wire so you don't burn your hand. And there we go. Now that we've detached that, go ahead and release the locks on the ribbon cable and pull out the motherboard. Since I've soldered the back vias to the ribbon cable, I'm going to have to leave the screen still somewhat attached to the unit. If you take photos of which one goes where, you can just go ahead and detach that. However, I'm just going to leave it as is. The next thing we have to do is to get the solder off the two sides of the power switch. So go ahead and grab your flux and put some on each side. We only need a little bit, so just put a little bit on each side. We're going to need some desoldering wick for this next part, so this is what I'm using. I'm using 2mm Super Wick by MG Chemicals. I'll leave a link in the description if you need some of this. Leaving our soldering iron at 300 degrees, I'm going to put the desoldering wick just over the side of the power switch. You definitely want to make sure not to drag this around. So I'm going to leave it on the spot for a second, and I'm going to push the side of the soldering iron into it. Since the power switch on mine hasn't been touched, we're going to have to add some leaded solder so we can get that off a lot easier. Make sure to put a little bit of flux on the bottom if you've already removed it like I have. Just a little bit. Nice. We're just putting a little bit of this to decrease the melting temperature. Now that we've added a little bit of leaded solder, this should be a lot easier to melt. Go ahead and put your desoldering braid on there and let it soak up all the solder. Nice. I got all that off, so let's do the other side next. Grab the smallest flat blade screwdriver you have. You definitely want something that's really thin. There's a little pad on top of this soldering spot. What we're effectively going to do is just to push this underneath, then we're going to tilt it, and it's going to lift it up. If you've used all your flux like I have, make sure to put a little bit more down. When dealing with any soldering, flux is definitely your friend. I think this might be a little easier under the microscope, so I'm going to grab my microscope just to show you what's going on. Okay, I got it under the microscope, so I can show you a little bit easier. You see that little tiny pad there? We need to get that off. So the easiest thing to do is to get a flat-bladed screwdriver, heat up that pad, stick this underneath, and lift it up. So I'm going to try to do that. It's a little difficult. There's not much on that side, so let's try the other side. Maybe I'll have better luck starting on this side instead. I guess it would also help if my soldering iron was a little hotter. Okay, now I got it at 300 degrees. It should come off a lot easier. Just gotta heat up that one side. Melt the solder. Well, the next thing that you can do if that's not working is to grab a pair of tweezers, stick it inside the switch, then heat up one side and twist it so it moves it up. This might work actually a lot better. Let's try the other side. Put in the power switch, heat up the plate, and lift it up. So I got it underneath, just twist it and it'll pop out. Then we can just lift the switch, and if we haven't broken it, there we go. Whoa, that one's so dirty. Wow. Whoa, no wonder it didn't work. Okay, so what we need to do now is we need to get this cleaned out. So I'll show you how to clean that. You want to grab a Q-tip, cut it in half so it's sharp on one end, then dip that end in rubbing alcohol. Then just use that to clean out the power switch. This may take a little while depending on how much there is, but it should do a good job of cleaning it. For a lot of this big stuff at the beginning, you can also use a brush. I'm going to use a brush to clean most of it out first, then I'm going to go back to the Q-tip. Now that we got most of the big stuff away, we can go back to the Q-tip and finish it up. Clean it a little bit more with the brush. Well, that looks a lot cleaner than what it was, doesn't it? If you're really picky like me, you can go clean it just a little bit more. It looks like there's a little bit of gunk in the corner, so I gotta try to dig that out. Wow, there was metal in there. Who knew? Get any of the residue from the corners. Alright, well, let's wait for that to dry before we put it back together. I'm just going to use a dry brush to get down any big pieces I might have missed. That looks so much better, doesn't it? You want to also clean that metal piece with rubbing alcohol and a Q-tip, but make sure not to leave any fibers on it. So I've gone ahead and cleaned that. For the switch itself, these metal parts are pretty delicate. Just use a brush with some IPA. Wait for this to dry before putting it back together. Put the switch back in. Right there. Then just grab the metal piece and put that over top. It doesn't matter which way it goes, they're both the same way. Takes a second to get it lined up. Once you get it lined up, just push it down. Nice. Now we got the switch back together. All we have to do is to put some solder on both of the ends. I'm going to also put some on these other pins to the power switch and just clean it up. When you're soldering down the ends, make sure to hold it down so it goes right to the board. Add a little bit of flux on each of the ends. So I'm just going to put a little bit of solder on the tip of my soldering iron. Then I'm going to hold it down and I'm going to put that solder right on that pad. That's a little much solder, so you can always clean it up, but it doesn't really matter because these are just the ground. There we go. Let's get the other side next. I got my soldering iron, just a little bit of solder. Push it down. Keep holding it down until the solder hardens. Very nice. I'm going to clean that up just ever so slightly. Last thing I'm going to do is clean up these other legs. I'm going to put a little bit of flux on those. Since these already have solder on them, I'm just going to put a very little on my soldering iron. Just a very little. very little. That's bad English. I'm just going to put a very small amount of solder on them. One leg at a time. And the last one. There you go. Let's also reattach the wire from the screen. Remember that goes to C on the power switch. There we go. Now just clean everything up with some IPA and put it back together. The brush might be better here because these little fibers keep getting ripped off. There we go. Let's clean that up. I'm going to give this a few minutes before I close it up, but that's all we need under the microscope. I think we did a pretty good job. Wait for this to dry, put it back together, and it should work a lot better. I'm going to wait for mine, then we'll check it out. Now that we've cleaned that power switch, this starts up much better. You're also going to notice that this light is not flickering anymore. And I haven't had any screen flickering since cleaning that power switch. Using IPS mods require a lot more power than the stock screen. This means cleaning the power switch is almost necessary. Aside from the power LED, this button is feeling a lot better on the side as well. I'm quite happy with the results, and I definitely think you should try this if you're having issues with your IPS screen or if your power LED is flickering. If you have any questions, make sure to ask in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future videos, and as always, thanks for watching.